Hello and welcome to Power of 10, a show about design operating at many levels of Zoom, from thoughtful detail through to transformation in organizations, society, and the world. My name is Andy Polaine. I'm a design leadership coach, designer, educator, and writer. My guest today is Lisa D. Dance, an experienced UX researcher whose 10 plus years of work has spanned UX research and strategy to interactive prototyping and usability testing. She has created award-winning work for enterprise organizations and also helped small to mid-sized businesses improve their websites and apps so they do not frustrate or harm customers. She is a contributor to CMS Wire and a frequent public speaker on topics related to user experience, customer experiences, ethical research and design, and technology's impact on people. She's also written a book called Today is the Perfect Day to Improve Customer Experience. Lisa, welcome to Power of 10.
Thank you, Andy.
I think I found you via Indy Young, actually, who mentioned you on the podcast I did with her. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to where you are now.
Certainly. So you gave me such a great intro, but my path to user experience started when I was 9 years old. And I told my mom I wouldn't shop at a particular store anymore because of how they treated their customers. And so ever since that time, I was always studying, now that I know customer interactions, but I was studying what was going on, and I was trying to strategize ways to improve it for both the customer and for the business. Because even at 9, I knew both of them needed to get what they wanted to achieve. And so I was always just studying that. And when I graduated from college, like, user experience wasn't a thing, or at least it wasn't a thing that I knew about. And so I went out in the world, at first I was supposed to be a lawyer. I went to law school orientation for a week and said, I do not want to be a lawyer. And so I'm out here in the world now trying to figure out, okay, so what career I'm going to, what's my career going to be like? And so I did struggle with that a bit, but I started getting in roles where I was sort of managing like programs. So I mortgaged like a customer retention program for a mortgage company. Mm-hmm. And I worked in like HR on the side of like administrating pension benefits. But in those roles, I was always trying to advocate for the customer, but also finding ways that would be a benefit to the business, right? And then parts of those roles also then brought in a technology piece to it. And so I was still kind of in this path of trying to, improve things for both businesses and customers. But on my second layoff, I said, I want to do something in that area, and I thought it was customer experience at the time. But in researching about customer experiences and trying to get more education, I found user experience research and design. And that was like, I took a course and it was like, ding, 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 I'm home, right? Because not only was I able to do what I was doing when I was 9, which was like sort of identifying these problems, but also like strategizing how to resolve them, right? And so that was kind of like a full circle moment for me with that. And so that's sort of like my path.
So you found your people and you're in
Yes.
that world. Yeah. Yeah. It happens to quite a lot of people, actually, I've noticed, and I mean, people know me for service design, although I've got a sort of background in interaction design and digital from before they had names. And, there's often that thing where people say, and then I discovered this thing and just the light bulbs went off and here I realized there's the way I think about the world other people do, and there's a whole methodology about it, and there's stuff I can learn about it. And it's always a nice moment when people have that, and particularly if they've turned it into their career. There's a very cute picture of you in the introduction, actually, of you when you're 9 years old in the book, right?
Yes.
Looking not unhappy with customer service, but that is the introduction to the book. So tell us a little about the book, and I always think people write a book because there's an itch they want to scratch of their own, as well as maybe seeing there's nothing out there like this. So why the book in the first place?
Well, certainly I guess about 6 or 7 years ago, I started seeing that, in my opinion, customer experiences were just getting increasingly worse, right? Mm-hmm. And how it showed up in my life was that I would have my to-do list of things that I needed to accomplish. But all of a sudden it would be like I couldn't get things off my list no matter how hard I tried. And it was always something related to my interaction with like a company or some other organization. And I couldn't get the issue resolved, at least not quickly, right? It was either, like there's some information that's wrong. I need to get a question answered. There's, something hasn't been delivered. This website's not working. It was always something, right? And it's getting to be really frustrating, especially when they started to overlap. So it wasn't just like one issue on the list, you'd have two or three. And so imagine how frustrated it is when you're just trying to move on with your life and you can't. And so as I started talking to first like family and friends, and they were having their own stories as well. And I'm like, it's something here to this, and the stories started getting increasingly worse. And I felt like out in the marketplace, maybe people were talking about, okay, people would complain about a particular, issue or story they had, but like, is there this underlying pattern of what's going on with this? Um, and as I started collecting more stories, and I started seeing, okay, there's a pattern, and it's a bit nuanced, and it's related to technology too, or at least the piece that I wanted to sort of hone in on, with my user experience background. And it was that piece of that sometimes technology is really wonderful and great, but sometimes it actually just exacerbates problems, of trying to get things resolved. And so that's sort of like the itch that I wanted to scratch, is to like really hone in on that, because I also truly believe that I don't think that a lot of leaders in organizations understand how bad their worst customer experience is. Like that it is so bad that they would not want their names associated with it. And I don't think that they get that sight into that, to really understand, like, we have to make better decisions.
Yeah. There's an old video by a guy called Dave McQuillan who's giving a presentation he used to around customer experience for Credit Suisse. And there's a bit in it where he talks about the fact he had 5 PhDs in the room and he handed them their credit card application form and said, can you fill this in? And none of them could do it. And, because obviously they get it just given to them automatically, right, for being employees at the place. And it was kind of one of those mismatches between, what people think, the organization is actually doing and what the actual experience of it is. Right. So the structure of the book is kind of, it's kind of case study after case study of like just really... really face palming bad customer experiences mostly. Would you say there is a kind of any sort of patterns to the structure or kind of flow through it that you started to put together as you did the book?
Well, certainly. So one big piece of the book is that the stories are illustrated. So I got this wonderful illustrator, Antonio Meza. And so he was able to illustrate this, ridiculous story that took me maybe 6 pages to write into like a 1-page illustration. So you could, understand the customer's context, what happened, the emotions that were going on with it, and sort of started to see the impact, as well as the what resolution, or if there was a resolution, right? So I'm introducing the what happened in an illustrated story. Then I'm breaking down within the book, talking about unpaid customer labor, and actually talking about what characteristics and organizations force customers to pay unpaid customer labor. So unpaid customer labor is that unwilling amount of time, money, and stress that you have to put in to try to get, the product that you purchased, or get it delivered, or get an issue resolved around it, right? And so I'm outlining like what characteristics of organizations require you to put in unpaid customer labor. So like examples of that are organizations that have limited customer service hours, right? They're selling to you 24 hours a day, but then you can't talk to them, but at really narrow times to get a really serious issue resolved. So I'm outlining those types of issues for each story, but then I'm also having a breakdown of the cost both for the customer and for the company. And I think that's a really important piece, because often the reframe is when you talk about customer experience issues, people will say, well, they're making a business decision to protect shareholder value and reduce costs. And what I really believe is that I don't think that some of these companies are actually counting all the cost of bad customer experiences. And if they really counted all of those costs, they would make different decisions within that. And so that I wanted to break that down as well, because, in some of these situations where the stories in the book where a customer talked with 6 employees, well, how much lost productivity is that, And then there are other issues, around customer rage and anger that, you know, make it so that far as employees, that this makes their job satisfaction much less, and there's a lot of turnover within front-facing companies. So then, are you adding up all the cost of having to so much turnover and having to try to increase satisfaction to the employees that are there? Like, there's a cascading cost to this that I just don't feel like that all organizations are calculating around a customer experience being bad.
Yeah. There's a very big number. I'm looking at it now, and I'm trying to work out, is this trillions then that we're talking here, that you have in the revenue loss under the counting of the costs?
Trillions, yes.
Yeah, it's like 887 trillion. I mean, it's a lot.
Right.
It goes on into the billions, right, of revenue loss. Where did that number come from?
That came from this great survey and study called the National Customer Rage Survey, and actually has its origins from a study done by the White House in 1976. Wow. And so the White House did this study in 1976 on customer complaints. And then this company in 2003 started the survey and used some of the questions, and so since then they've done 10 iterations of it, and in my book, and that number is from the 2023 version of it. So they can say, when they say that customer experiences problems are at an all-time high and that they more than doubled in 1976, they have that,
they have the data. I love Well, I love and I don't love that there's a customer rage index survey.
Yeah.
It's not just complaints, but rage. I think a lot of people kind of can relate to that.
Yes. And it's awful for the customers involved. It's awful for the employees that are experiencing it. And oftentimes the employees who are experiencing it have absolutely nothing to do with the decisions that the customer is angry about, but they are the ones that get, unfortunately, the rage and the anger.
Tell us about Peggy. You have this figure. You have this figure Peggy in your book.
Yes. So Peggy is this bright light within organizations that, like, if a customer is trying to get a problem resolved, if you're lucky enough to stumble on and talk to Peggy, she's that one or two employees who either have been there that long that they just have all of the, the institutional knowledge. They know all the mergers, the system changes, all the different policies, and they are able to actually help you, right? That you're not talking to someone who doesn't even. A lot of times you talk to employees and they might not even recognize that it is an issue. You have to prove to them that it's an issue. Peggy actually understands that and knows how to solve it, right? And so Peggy can be that, that one long-term employee, but also Peggy sometimes is a newer employee, but just have taken so much initiative beyond the training and the process and procedures to really understand what problems are and to collect knowledge and have relationships throughout the company to actually be able to solve customers' problems. So if you're lucky enough to get a Peggy, you are very lucky because your problem is going to be solved. But a lot of times there isn't a Peggy, and you are struggling with employees who can't explain what the problem is. They can't explain what caused it. They don't know how to solve it. And it's like I was mentioning before, sometimes you have to convince them that there is actually a problem, right? Because they'll say things like, well, my system says, but your system is not the golden rule to everything. Your system gets is made by people, and the people, don't always get it right.
There's a thing I do in, when I'm teaching service design or teaching that kind of journey flow thing, and saying, there's often a flow chart, and it's kind of boxes and arrows, right? And it says something like, Jeff pays his bill, arrow, membership details are updated. And I'm like, yeah, but what happens when Jeff pays his bill and his membership details? And what happens when that arrow breaks? Because the arrow on those diagrams is very innocuous, but
Right.
there's this assumption that this whole kind of infrastructure is actually working to enable that. And then Jeff rings up and, and says to, I don't know, the sports club, and says, but I paid my bill. And they say, yeah, but we haven't seen it. And so it's gone out of my bank account. It's not updated in our system. And then all of a sudden you have this thing, I call it the sort of, you talk about gaps, actually, we'll talk about that in a minute, but this sort of experience crevasse, it's like, it's quite narrow, and you could jump over it as a customer, and frequently do. But once you've fallen down into it, you're in this kind of deep crevasse that no one can, no one can even hear you, right? And you're sort of shouting up, going, help, help, help. It's like
And then that's when
on
you
hold.
start the unpaid customer labor of your time, money, and
Climbing back
stress
up.
trying to crawl, and then you scrape your your knuckles, and you fall down, and you try, So
So
absolutely.
we kind of laugh about this stuff, talking about it. And, like you probably, when I tell people what I do, and it takes a little while to explain the service design thing, they go, oh, the other day, I was trying to get my broadband installed, or whatever it is, and I get like loads and loads and loads of these stories, which, you've collected many of. I think it was Lou Down said Lou Down wrote a book called Good Services. And they said, if these things were physical products, they would be recalled, right? Because they're, and in some cases they, are actually dangerous as digital services, but often just as, they're just deeply frustrating. But for some reason, services do not get the same kind of scrutiny as physical things. Why do you think? So, you're in the book, you've gone through and you've kind of analysed a lot of these things. Why do you think this is happening so often? Maybe more often than having, if a company brought out a car or something. I mean, occasionally happens, and like the Tesla thing, right? The gas pedal is not working properly. Then all of a sudden, there's kind of big panic. Why is this not happening in these kind of service customer experiences?
Well, I think, sometimes it's about that they haven't done any research, or they haven't done enough research on what the customer wants and needs and their context, right? And so they're just not even designing anything that meets that need, right? A lot of times I think people assume that they know, okay, well, I pay my payment. So yeah, I know I can design this, right? Versus say you're trying to, create a physical product like a television. Well, you don't you don't know how all of those things have to go together, right? So I think that is that as well. But I think that there's also been some philosophies about product design that have not always been the best. The minimum, valuable product, and
Viable product, yeah.
yes, because you know on the bad side of that, you're just experimenting with with customers, on something that can be really, really quite flawed, and so then they put that out there, and it's always a backlog, which they never get to, right? Because the priority, at least in a lot of companies, they're being incentivized to create more features instead of actually resolving the backlog and actually making their core product like a really good experience, they are looking to say, oh, we have a new feature and let's bring in, sell that and bring in new revenue that away. Yes, I think that those are some of the reasons. Yeah.
I hear this quite often from design folks, actually, where they say, they keep saying, yeah, we'll fix it in the next release, but they never do. And my sort of mental metaphor of this is it's like people kind of racing along on a speedboat and things fall overboard and they say, well, we'll go back and get that later on. And then when they look back and someone says, well, you said we'll go back and get that. And they look back and it's so far away, they go, oh, we don't have time to turn around and go get that now. And so it just speeds on. And there's this kind of litter of broken stuff floating around behind.
Right. Yeah, it's an ocean of it at this point. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There's actually, to extend this metaphor slightly, when I moved, I lived in Australia twice. And when I've moved with a container, across the ocean and you have to have it insured. When I was like, he said, yeah, well, obviously in case it goes overboard. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, no, it's about kind of 400 containers go overboard. It might be more actually every year. And I thought, really? He said, yeah, and then they sit in the shipping lane, and because it kind of gets an air pocket in one corner, so it's like an iceberg, right? You just have this little corner of it sticking out the water, but the rest of the container is underwater, with all my furniture in it. And it just reminds me of that, because those things then come and really scupper people's customer journeys. Look at that. My metaphor completely worked.
Absolutely.
There's another kind of time cost, though, or time theft. You talked about this. So that sort of unpaid labour is there. Well, actually, maybe those two are different concepts, really. But the unpaid labour of just making it difficult for customers, or not making it easy. And maybe it depends. Some organisations, it definitely feels like you've made this difficult. Like it isn't. There's no phone number for Facebook, right? Anywhere. Other organisations, I think, just accidentally have that problem. And so there's this sort of invisible labour of those things, of that unpaid labour. And it's often falls on other members of the family too. You've got an example of, I think, someone's grandson or something like that helping them fit in something. So there's that goes on. There's also a whole thing, billed as convenience around self-service, right? Of self-check-in and whether that's at a kiosk at the airport or whether that's doing it on your phone or, my mum's 84 now. So there's a lot of stuff there where she's like, oh, I suppose it's all on the phone, isn't it now? But I'd really much prefer to have something printed out and all of that stuff. I'm going to a concert on Friday. I'm going to see Adele, actually. And
wow.
There's no way of actually having a printed ticket, right? It has to be on a smartphone. So there's all those kinds of things. But even, I don't eat in McDonald's, but, go to McDonald's and there's, clearing your tray, or punching in the order these days. I think that, I don't know when that came in. Like I said, don't really eat at McDonald's, but I've seen people, then they go in and there's a screen, you put in your order, and basically the staff are just there to kind of, you can see how they'd be replaced by a robot because they're just there to kind of deliver the order on the thing, and that's it. There's an awful lot of unpaid labour that's crept into services. Some of it's useful, but a lot of it is more like this is a way of us to present a service convenience, but in fact you're working for the company. Have you come across that quite a lot in your travels?
Yeah, absolutely. Because thinking about self-service, yeah, when it works, it's wonderful and it's convenient. But if it doesn't work, like especially we're thinking about like online things, there isn't an employee there if there's an issue to resolve it, right? And so then not only like I'm stuck in this, now I have to go through their, customer service or customer support, whatever mechanisms they have to try to get someone to resolve it. So a lot of times I feel like, when companies have championed these digital transformations and self-service and things like that, they're really giving you the work right? And saying, hell, this is more convenient. And sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not convenient because it's very difficult. And if it's not designed well, you can't get past it, right? And so you are trying to do the work, you can't do the work, then you're doing more work to let them know you can't do the work, and then you still have to pay your money for it, and and it's just a vicious cycle, you know what I mean? So yeah, that is that dark side, I would say, of digital transformations and self-service that nobody sort of talks about. It's in the store or in McDonald's. If you hit the button and something doesn't work, and then you can call somebody over and potentially they can resolve it. But then, like, it's a story in my book where I went to a self-service kiosk, and as I had put in my payment, and the screen said order terminated. Well, that didn't sound right, and and so I looked at they have a board up there with your orders are coming in, and it wasn't on there. I told an employee, they looked up on the board, didn't see it. So they didn't know how to do anything with the computer part of it, the kiosk. So they rung up my order again. And then 2 weeks later, I get duplicate charges. And so then I have to go back and do my unpaid customer labor to get my money back with it. So, so all that to say is that, like, sometimes in person, there's a person there who can resolve the issue in a self-service environment. Sometimes they still can. And definitely online, most of the time there is not an employee there to resolve the issue right in that moment. So,
Well, and soon it's replaced by an AI chatbot who just invents stuff anyway.
Right. That's very ineffective. And it's interesting you brought that up, is that the White House last week announced an initiative called Time is Money that's talking exactly about the things that I was talking about in my book, about these companies and the everyday hassles that they are forcing upon customers and taking their time and money. And they're announcing this government-wide effort through different agencies to crack down on that. And one of the things that they were talking about was AI chatbots that actually can't actually resolve an issue, right? And how they were, through different agencies, they were going to have rules and regulations to try to crack down on that for companies. So I think they mentioned in the initiative, like, especially like for banks, that banks can't have this AI chatbot and that doesn't actually help resolve your issue.
Yeah.
So
talk to the bot. The organization isn't listening. It's a very asymmetric relationship, right, too. I think that's one of the things we talked about in our book, actually, on service design, where, if I don't have a ticket on a train, I can get fined on the spot, and the ticket inspector's going to take my credit card and make me buy the ticket plus the fine and all that immediately. Whereas if the train is cancelled or delayed and I can claim my money back, it can take months sometimes for that to happen. And it does feel like, it's a bit like in the UK, I don't know if you know, but there was this thing called the hostile environment kind of foreign policy for asylum seekers in particular, which was just to make it really difficult, right? It's difficult and expensive to apply for asylum and get citizenship and all the rest, or residency and all the rest of it. And if you've ever tried to get citizenship in another place in the world, you'll find out how hostile that is or not. And you realize, okay, this is actually set up for just to put so many hurdles in the way that people will give up, rather than actually kind of chase it up, and it's often only until they write to the newspaper or it becomes a kind of meme online, and then all of a sudden, it becomes a PR disaster. For that stuff to kick in. But it is I think from a So my theory about this is that I think humans anthropomorphize everything, right? We talk about our cars and our animals as if they're humans, and I think we do this with companies or organizations too. And so we relate to them as if they're another human being, and but they obviously don't act like that. They act in this completely different and unreasonable way, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so jarring all the time to have that experience.
Well, definitely. And then in the U.S., there's like a doctrine or something that a corporation actually it's like the status of a person, but they don't have the consequences of a person, right? And so
very nicely put.
Yeah. So and you are in these circumstances, you have all of the the pain and the suffering of this. And I talk about in my book that people who have the least resources, this is even worse for them, because if your money is held in limbo and you don't have any money, then that's the money that you want to use to feed yourself or to pay your rent or take care of your children. And then you are in such a deficit and a vulnerable position when you get in a situation like that where your money is held in limbo. And you don't, and then oftentimes it's, some people, they don't have the time. They don't have a nice office job where they can stay on the phone and call for hours and wait on hold to try to get something resolved. And so sometimes they just have to give up, but they really can't even afford to give up either. And so that's the really, that's the part in a lot of this that bothers me the most, is that you're really doing harm to people, like above and beyond what they lost far as in the money and the transaction, right? A cascading cost of it. It's interesting that you were mentioning about the media, because one of the stories in the book is about my over 3 year struggle to get unemployment benefits that were from the pandemic. And I wrote the story in the book. All the other stories are private, for private companies, but I also wanted to put far as an example of government as well, because there's expectation around customer service and customer experience for government as well. And actually, the only reason I actually finally got my money after over 3 years is because I contacted a reporter, and a reporter contacted the Virginia Employment Commission, and then suddenly they were calling me to see if they had the right address, and in 2 days of them calling, I had my money that I had been waiting 3 years to get.
Awful. Yeah.
Yes. And so that oftentimes is what's happening as well. And so that circles back to, I wanted to say for 2 points. One is that in that situation with the unemployment, the part that bothered me and worried me the whole time is that I knew that there were hundreds of thousands of people who were in the same situation as me, with the Virginia Unemployment Commission. And that I definitely know that there were people who were in much more precarious situations than I. And if you don't have a job and then you're getting your unemployment and you still have to eat and live there and take care of your kids, what do you do? And so that's just bothered me to a core with that. But then also it circles back to, if companies are waiting until the media contacts them to, do the right thing, and that's the only way that you can get them to do the right thing, that's there's a cost to that too, because then you're having to make sure you are monitoring, all kinds of platforms and things like that for reputation, right? Now with online platforms, there are just numerous ways of people to vent their displeasure or just share their story of how something has gone wrong. And I think of an example is that Vanguard just got a new CEO, and there was an article about a month or so in the Wall Street Journal talking about that longtime customers were imploring the new CEO to improve is their customer service, right? And like, is that really what you want? Is that like you get a story in the Wall Street Journal that your customer experiences are that bad? And some people in one of the articles I read, they said, well, maybe one of their strategies is that they want to get rid of sort of these customers because they don't make them as much money, and they wanted to put them in this sort of, I think, like personal advising service or something like that. But I'm thinking to myself, well, how many people are you losing when you have a story in the Wall Street Journal about how bad your customer experience are, So that's like, I think people need to think through, like, there are lots of other cascading costs of consequences.
Well, that's an invisible one as well, because you don't know how many customers you didn't get because they didn't even start the process.
Right.
My favorite story of this is there was a story that hit the papers in Australia. It's quite a few years ago now, where a guy went into the Optus store. Optus is like the second largest telco in Australia, and chained himself to the reception desk because he had spent so many hours trying to get the ownership of his iPad's business account number or data account changed. And in the end, they had to call the police and stuff, and it was resolved kind of peacefully. And it's a kind of funny story, and obviously you're in a shop full of smartphones, right? So of course, what happens is pictures of that everywhere, and it hit the media. And it sounds funny on the one hand, but you also have to kind of think that guy who's a small business owner is so frustrated that he's bought a length of chain and gone into a shop and chained himself to it and risked being arrested because of his frustration. And I always kind of show that story quite often because, the initial thing is, that's really funny. And then actually when you think about it, it's not funny at all. It's really tragic.
Very tragic and disturbing. And to think about how the mental frustrations that he has had to go through to get him to that point, and they don't eat. And even though he got the issue resolved, like, having to go to that extreme of a step, that stress sort of still kind of, you still have a flashback of this really negative emotion. Because as I was collecting these stories, one person's like, they had to take a moment because talking about it was very stressful. And I put like a caution, on my table of contents, like, if you feel stressed about this and it's like triggering you on some situation that you have, then, take a moment and de-stress from that. Because what I found is when I talk to people and mention about my book, everybody has 1, 2, or 9 stories. And the companies they still have a lingering, really negative feelings about it. You know what I mean? So it doesn't just sort of dissipate just because you've gotten it resolved. Not when these issues have gone to the extent that, like the ones examples in the book or this gentleman, you know.
No, it can leave definitely a real trace. It can leave kind of fear as well of doing things and all sorts, I think, too.
Yeah, well, you know what I also mentioned in the book is, like, customers, when you run into an issue, you get that familiar sense of dread of, is this going to be something that actually I can resolve really quickly? Or is this going to be, am I going to go into, this abyss and, who knows when it's going to get resolved? And so you do feel that because you've gotten it enough that that's what the experience of things are now. So
you occasionally get the opposite where they resolve, you ring up and thinking with that dread and say, okay, I've sorted that out for you. Is there anything else I can do? And you're like, oh, I was expecting that to be so much harder than it was. No, that's it, thanks.
You're right. Or you get a Peggy.
Yeah, I got a Peggy. Listen, we're coming up to time. It's been great chatting to you. The show is named after this Ray and Charles Eames film. It's all about kind of the size of relative. It's called Powers of 10, all about the relative size of things in the universe. So the final question is always, what one small thing is either overlooked or could be redesigned that would have an outsized effect on the world?
I think that when you're designing a product or service technology, it's taking that step to really think through what could go wrong and actually resolving it early on, or actually putting in a step if something goes wrong, where's that really quick and easy way to get it resolved. I think people design for the happy path as if everything's happy and nothing ever will go wrong. But if you actually just took a little bit of time to think about how something may go wrong, you can avoid just so much pain on the backside. So that would be it.
Very good.
For me.
I think I'd add to this, if I may, which is, empowering those frontline staff. I think quite often they are treated as kind of very in menial roles and not very trusted. And if they're able to, they're given the power to, I don't know, to credit a certain amount back without question or without having to go to a supervisor. Sometimes I kind of think, why are you even having to ask someone about that? The time it takes you to do that is going to cost you more, or the organization more, than just saying, yeah, okay, we'll refund that. So where can people find you online?
Certainly. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Lisa D. Dance, or you can find me on my website, which is serviceease.net. And if you want to sign up, I have a newsletter. It's called Tell a Friend. You can sign up for that on my website as well, and that comes out monthly.
Great. And the book is todayistheperfectday.com.
Yes, and that's the website for the book. Definitely.
Cool. I'll put all the links in the show notes. Lisa, thank you so much for being my guest on Power of 10.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it so much.
You've been watching and listening to Power of 10. You can find more about the show on Polaine.com, where you can also check out my leadership coaching practice, online courses, as well as sign up for my regular newsletter, Doctor's Note. If you have any thoughts, please put them in the comments or get in touch. You can share your horrific customer experience there too. You'll find me as Polaine on pkm.social on Mastodon. You'll find me on LinkedIn or my website. All the links are in the show notes too. Thanks for listening and watching, and I'll see you next time.